She once told me, "At 45, I thought love was over." I was 23 when I realized I wanted to prove her wrong. I wasn't planning on staying long that night. A late summer gathering at a friend's house. The kind of evening where people drift in and out, where the food is good but the conversations can be surface level. I had work the next morning, and honestly, I didn't expect anything more than a few polite laughs and maybe a drink before heading home. But then I saw her. The backyard was strung with warm lights, glowing like little amber stars against the deepening blue of the sky. Music played softly in the background, an old jazz tune, slow enough to give the whole night an easy rhythm. Most people clustered around the grill or the table piled high with food. She was leaning slightly away from the noise, standing by the low wooden fence with a glass of wine in her hand. What struck me first wasn't how she looked, though she was striking in a way that made me pause. It was the way she carried herself. There was no need to draw attention, no loud laugh or big gestures. She simply stood there, watching the crowd with a quiet ease, and somehow that made her presence more magnetic than anyone else's. I found myself stealing glances, noticing the details. The soft waves of her dark hair catching the glow of the string lights. The way she tilted her head slightly when someone spoke to her, as if she was giving them her full attention. Her smile was small, not showy, but it lingered just long enough to make you want to keep talking, just to see it again. When our eyes met for the first time, it wasn't dramatic. No lightning strike, no sudden rush of sound fading away. Just a steady, unhurried look, like she was quietly measuring me, and then a faint curve of her lips before she glanced back to her glass. And yet, something about that moment settled into me. I eventually worked up the courage to walk over, mostly because I couldn't stand the idea of leaving the night without at least hearing her voice. Up close, I noticed the faintest lines at the corners of her eyes, not something that diminished her beauty, but something that made it feel lived in, earned. Not a fan of the crowd either. I asked, half a joke, half a lifeline to start the conversation. Her laugh was soft, not dismissive, but warm, like she appreciated the attempt. "Sometimes it's easier to enjoy the night from the edges," she said, her voice low and steady. There was something in the way she said it, as if she wasn't just talking about the party, but about something larger. And just like that, the noise of the evening began to fade for me. We talked, and the small space by the fence became its own little world. She asked me questions that didn't feel rushed or obligatory, and when I answered, she listened with an attentiveness I wasn't used to. That was the first moment I realized this wasn't going to be just another night. The second time we spoke, I realized the first conversation hadn't been luck. It wasn't just the atmosphere of that night or the wine making things easy. No, she had this way of drawing me in again, like our words naturally found each other. It was a quieter evening, a smaller gathering this time. The music was lower, the crowd less restless. Somehow, once more, we ended up side by side, though I couldn't tell if that was coincidence or something unspoken pulling us together. We sat at the edge of the porch, the wood still warm from the day's heat. The smell of late summer air clung around us. Cut grass, charcoal smoke drifting faintly from the grill, a sweetness from someone's open bottle of cider. She asked what I was working on, not out of politeness, but with a genuine curiosity that made me sit a little straighter as I answered. Normally, I keep my responses short. I don't like talking too much about myself. But with her, words tumbled out. I told her about my studies, my uncertain plans, the pressure I felt to figure it out. And she listened, really listened, as if every thought mattered. When she spoke about her own life, her stories carried the weight of experience, but not in a way that felt distant. She told me about a trip she once took to Italy, about sitting on a cobblestone street and eating fresh bread with olive oil that tasted like sunlight. Her eyes lit up when she described it, and I could almost see her there, younger, freer, yet still entirely her. I noticed the way she talked with her hands, subtle movements that matched the rhythm of her voice. When she laughed at some small detail, she tilted her head back just slightly, and for a moment I forgot what I had been about to say, too caught up in the sound of her amusement. Every so often, someone from the party would interrupt, and I would watch her shift effortlessly into polite conversation before turning back to me. And each time, she leaned in just a little closer, as though to say, "I'd rather be here, talking with you." It wasn't the kind of closeness you could measure in inches, but in attention. The kind of intimacy that forms when someone looks at you and doesn't just see you, but sees into you. I caught myself studying the small details, the way her fingers curled around her glass, the tiny crease at the bridge of her nose when she was thinking. And I realized that I didn't just want to talk with her tonight. I wanted to know how she thought, what she believed, what she feared, what she hoped for. When the evening drew to an end, I walked away with the sound of her voice still echoing in my head. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't just feel like I had talked to someone. I felt like I had been understood. And that was something I wasn't prepared to let go of easily. It was late when I offered to walk her home. The night had grown quiet, most of the laughter and music from the house fading behind us as we stepped onto the dimly lit street. The air was cooler now, the kind that settles on your skin and makes you pull your jacket a little tighter. She didn't say much at first, and neither did I. We simply walked, our steps falling into a rhythm that felt natural, unforced. The neighborhood was hushed, only the sound of our shoes on the pavement and the distant hum of crickets filling the silence. I kept stealing glances at her, the lamplight brushing against her profile as we passed beneath each glow. Her expression seemed thoughtful, almost heavy, like something had been pressing on her mind all night. Finally, she slowed and stopped beneath a tall lamppost, her hand gently resting against the cool metal as if to steady herself. I turned toward her, waiting. She exhaled, the kind of sigh that carries years behind it, and said quietly, "At 45, I thought love was over." The words hung in the air, heavier than anything else we'd spoken before. There was no bitterness in her tone, no sharp edge. It was softer than that, steadier, as if she had accepted it long ago. And maybe that's what made it hit harder. It wasn't a complaint. It was a truth she had taught herself to live with. I wanted to say something, anything that could pull her away from that belief. But in that moment, words felt clumsy. So I just stood there, watching her fingers trace the rough edge of the lamppost, watching the breeze lift a strand of hair across her cheek. "You reach a point," she continued, her eyes fixed on the ground, "where you stop expecting things to happen. You tell yourself you've had your chance, that maybe the rest of life is about stability, comfort, not sparks." She gave a small, almost embarrassed laugh at her own honesty, though her eyes didn't quite meet mine. I felt something tighten in my chest. Part of me wanted to argue, to tell her she was wrong, that I was standing right there, drawn to her in ways I couldn't explain. But another part of me hesitated, afraid to put too much weight on the moment, afraid to break the fragile trust she'd just placed in me. So instead, I stepped a little closer, close enough to notice the faint scent of her perfume, something floral, grounded, mature, like it belonged to her, and only her. I didn't touch her. I didn't reach out, though every part of me wanted to. In the glow of the lamplight, I realized the gap between us wasn't just measured in years. It was an experience, in the battle she had fought quietly, in the fear she had carried alone. And suddenly, I understood. If I wanted to be part of her life, it wouldn't be about convincing her with promises. It would be about proving it, gently, patiently, in the spaces between words. That night, walking her the rest of the way home, I said very little. But inside, I knew something had shifted. She had let me see the weight she carried, and I couldn't pretend I hadn't felt it too. The rain had started just as I reached the cafe. A steady drizzle that blurred the windows and turned the street outside into a watercolor painting of umbrellas and headlights. Inside, it was warm, the kind of warmth that carries the faint aroma of roasted beans and pastries. She was already there, seated by the window, her fingers wrapped around a mug of tea, steam curling upward like a veil between her and the gray world outside. She looked up when I walked in, and for a moment I caught the smallest smile, not wide, not deliberate, just a quiet acknowledgement that she was glad I'd come. That single expression settled something restless inside me. We talked easily the way we always did. About work, about books, about the strange little details of life that most people brush past. With her, even silence felt like part of the conversation. She didn't fill every pause. She let it breathe, let it be comfortable, which made me feel like I didn't have to perform. At one point, I said something, a half-joke, really, about how the rain always seemed to follow me. She laughed, that low, steady laugh that always seemed to wrap itself around me. And then, without thinking, she rested her hand lightly over mine on the table. Just for a second. It wasn't deliberate, I don't think. More instinct than intention. But that touch, the warmth of her skin against mine, the gentleness of it, sent a current straight through me. By the time she pulled her hand back, my pulse was still racing, as though the imprint of her touch hadn't left. I tried to keep the conversation going, but part of me was elsewhere, replaying that moment in my head. The brush of her fingers, the way she hadn't seemed to notice what it meant, though I certainly had. Later, as we stood to leave, she reached for her coat, and I noticed her struggling a little with the scarf that had tangled around her. Without thinking, I stepped closer. "Here, let me," I said, my voice quieter than I intended. She didn't protest. She simply stood there as I lifted the scarf, draping it gently around her neck. My fingers brushed against the edge of her jaw as I adjusted it, just the faintest graze of skin against skin. Her breath caught, almost imperceptibly, but I felt it, and my own breath faltered in response. For a moment we were close, too close for the casualness of the gesture. Her eyes met mine, steady but uncertain, as though she wasn't sure whether to step back or lean in. I didn't push. I simply let my hands fall, my heart pounding as though I'd crossed a line I hadn't actually crossed. Outside, the rain was still falling, the air cool and damp. We walked side by side beneath her umbrella, the narrow space between us charged with everything we hadn't said. And I knew, without a doubt, that something unspoken had shifted that afternoon. A door had opened, quiet, tentative, but impossible to close again. It was one of those evenings when the sky still held a trace of gold, though the street lamps had already flickered on. We had walked for a while in the park, talking about little things, the weather, the turning of the leaves, even a stray dog that seemed determined to follow us halfway down the path. But as the air cooled and the day leaned into night, the conversation slowed. She grew quieter, her gaze drifting further away with each step. We ended up on a wooden bench not far from the water, the surface of the pond catching fragments of light. I sat beside her, leaving just enough space between us that the distance itself became noticeable. I didn't want to push. I could feel something stirring in her, the kind of silence that isn't empty but heavy, full of words waiting to be spoken. Finally, she sighed, her shoulders sinking as if under a weight she had been carrying too long. "You know," she began softly, her eyes fixed on the still water ahead. "This whatever it is between us, people won't understand." Her words hung in the cool air, making the night suddenly sharper. She didn't look at me when she said it. Instead, she twisted her hands in her lap, fingers threading and unthreading as if to keep them busy. I swallowed, searching for something to say, but she continued before I could. "You're so young. You have everything in front of you." And me, she shook her head, a wry smile tugging at her lips, though it didn't reach her eyes. "I've already lived through the part you're just beginning. You'll regret this someday, when a novelty wears off, when you realize what you gave up." Her voice wasn't sharp, but it trembled at the edges. Not because she doubted me, I realized, but because she doubted herself. Because she was afraid of being selfish, afraid of letting herself want something she had long ago convinced herself wasn't possible. I turned slightly toward her, resting my hand close to hers on the bench, not touching, just there waiting. The space between our hands felt louder than anything either of us had said. "I don't see it that way," I said finally, my voice low. "I don't feel like I'm giving something up. I feel like I'm finding something I didn't expect." She glanced at me then, her eyes shimmering under the glow of the lamplight. For a heartbeat, I thought she might take my hand, but instead, she looked away, pressing her lips together as if to keep her resolve from slipping. The silence stretched, aching but tender, and though I wanted desperately to close the gap, to take her hand and make her believe me, I didn't. I knew this moment wasn't about convincing her. It was about being steady, about letting her see that I wasn't going to run just because she hesitated. So I sat there beside her, the night cool around us, the weight of her fears heavy between us. And though she pulled back, though she tried to set walls around her heart, I couldn't help but feel that the very act of sharing those fears with me was its own kind of closeness, fragile, unsteady, but real. The night we left the park together, something in the air felt different. The weight of her words still lingered, the fears, the hesitation, and yet she hadn't walked away. She let me walk her home, our steps slow, measured, as though neither of us wanted to reach the end too soon. The streets were mostly empty, the rain from earlier having left the pavement dark and glistening under the lamps. She kept her hands tucked in her coat pockets, shoulders drawn slightly in, like she was holding herself together. I stayed close, not brushing against her, but near enough that I could feel the warmth radiating from her, even through the cool night air. When we finally reached her building, she stopped at the bottom step, turning slightly toward me. The silence stretched, heavier than before, as though we both knew the moment mattered. She glanced at the door, then back at me, her expression torn, her lips pressing together, her eyes shimmering in the faint light. "I should go," she whispered, almost to herself. But she didn't move. Something inside me tightened. I didn't want to lose the chance, not to fear, not to hesitation. Still, I knew if I pushed too hard, I could break the fragile trust she had given me. So instead, I reached gently for her hand. Her fingers were warm, soft, and when I wrapped mine around them, I felt the slightest tremor run through her. She didn't pull away. She looked at me, finally, really looked at me, and the vulnerability in her gaze nearly undid me. "Do you see what I mean?" she murmured, her voice trembling. "This is dangerous for me. For you." I shook my head slowly, my thumb brushing against the back of her hand in small, steady circles. "No," I said quietly. "This feels right." Her eyes softened, glistening now, and for a moment it seemed she was on the verge of tears. She took a shaky breath, and I stepped closer, close enough that I could feel the warmth of her breath mingling with mine. I didn't kiss her. I didn't cross that line. Instead, I lowered my forehead to hers, the gentlest of touches, so slight that I felt the whisper of her hair against my skin. Her breath hitched, and in that fragile closeness, it was as though the world went still. We stood there like that, hand in hand, forehead to forehead, suspended between fear and longing. My heart pounded against my ribs, and yet I felt an odd sense of calm, as if this was exactly where I was meant to be. She closed her eyes, her other hand rising slowly, hesitantly, until her fingertips brushed against my jaw. That single touch, tender, trembling, full of everything she couldn't yet say, sent a shiver through me. And in that moment, nothing else mattered. Not the age gap, not the doubts, not the shadows of tomorrow weeks later. The rhythm of our evenings had changed. We no longer needed the excuse of gatherings or chance encounters. Instead, I found myself walking to her house as naturally as I might head home, as if her place had quietly become another anchor in my life. That night, the air was crisp, the kind that hinted at autumn settling in. We sat on her porch wrapped together in a thick blanket, mugs of tea warming our hands. The porch light glowed softly above us, and beyond the railing, the trees whispered in the evening breeze. Cicadas hummed steadily, filling the spaces between our words with a kind of music neither of us felt the need to interrupt. She leaned against me, her head resting just over my heart. I felt the steady weight of her there, the slow rise and fall of her breathing syncing with mine. There was something grounding in the simplicity of it, not grand, not dramatic, just the quiet truth of two people choosing to sit close when they could just as easily have sat apart. Her hand slipped into mine beneath the blanket, fingers threading through with a firmness that hadn't been there before. No hesitation this time, no pulling back. I squeezed gently, and she let out a sigh, almost as if the act of holding on had allowed her to finally let something go. For a while, we didn't talk. And when she finally spoke, her voice was so soft, I almost mistook it for part of the night air. Maybe love isn't over after all. The words weren't a declaration. They weren't even meant for me, I think. They were whispered like a confession to herself, like a truth she was still learning to believe. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I tilted my head slightly and pressed a kiss to her temple, slow and unhurried, letting my lips linger just long enough for her to feel the steadiness in the gesture. While I pulled back, I said quietly, "It doesn't have to be." She turned her face slightly then, just enough that her cheek brushed against my chest. I felt her smile before I saw it, small and certain, warming the cool night air. And sitting there, with her hand in mine and her weight against me, I realized something important. Love doesn't always arrive in fireworks or sweeping moments. Sometimes it comes quietly, like a gentle knock at the door you almost didn't open. Sometimes it shows up when you've already convinced yourself it won't. As the night stretched on, we stayed there, wrapped in each other's warmth, the world outside slipping further away. She didn't speak again, and neither did I. We didn't need to. Everything had already been said, in the touch of her hand, in the steadiness of my arm around her, in the simple fact that neither of us was going anywhere. And for the first time, I knew love wasn't over for her, and it was only just beginning for us.